So good evening, everyone, and welcome. Bonjour et bienvenue to our friends in Quebec. My name is Alex Gates. I'm the Executive Director and Curator here at the Canadian Automotive Museum. And tonight we are gathered to welcome the 1897 Fossmobile tribute replica automobile into our collection, as you can see right next to me, which has been Ron Foss's, how do I even describe it? Passion project for the last few years. Him and many supporters, many family members, and many historians across Canada working on this project. And it's absolutely wonderful to see it here in the museum gallery on view for all Canadians to come through and check it out. We have a lovely letter from the Prime Minister's office, which I will read before I go to my remarks. So I won't try to do an impersonation or anything. I will read it as myself. This is sent to all of us. So it reads, "Dear friends, I am pleased to extend my warmest greetings to everyone attending today's ceremony, marking the introduction of the Fossmobile into the Canadian Automotive Museum in Oshawa, Ontario. Since 1963, the Canadian Automotive Museum has paid tribute to automotive history with a special focus on the Canadian industry. The stories and vehicles enshrined in this museum are a testament to our country's rich automotive heritage. Today, you have gathered to welcome the newest inductee to the museum, the Fossmobile, Canada's first successful gasoline engine automobile, originally built in 1897 in Sherbrooke, Quebec, by George Foote Foss. I join you in congratulating the Foss family, Fossmobile Enterprises, and everyone involved in the building of this tribute replica. With this recognition, George Foote Foss takes his place alongside other automotive pioneers whose remarkable stories are certain to inspire future generations. Please accept my best wishes for an enjoyable and memorable ceremony. Sincerely, Prime Minister, the Honorable Justin P.J. Trudeau, PC, MP. That's all. So to make sure that's all out there. So thank you very much to the Prime Minister for sending his remarks. His remarks are also in French. Dumaresq will read those later. It's a little. I could try to read them, but I will let Dumaresq handle those. So this evening, we're just going to have a few quick remarks by myself, and then Dumaresq is going to do some remarks in French for those francophones in attendance here, but also who are viewing online. Our video is going to be on YouTube later as well. And then, of course, we'll hear from the man of the hour, Ron Foss himself, a little bit about the journey that he's gone through with this project on a personal level, welcoming it here. From his garage, from photographs, from conversations with your grandfather, all the way up to seeing it here in 3D, which is absolutely thrilling. I do want to say that it is projects like this that really demonstrate how recent the automobile is in terms of the impact on our lives. So we have an example of Ron, and it was just his grandfather who built the first gasoline-powered automobile here in Canada. So just looking at a couple of generations, what really has gone from an idea with someone working in their bicycle repair shop in what was a fairly small town at the time, to the industry that we see here today, with over 20 million automobiles being built here in Oshawa. The wonderful part about having the Fossmobile here at the Canadian Automotive Museum is that we can see the Fossmobile right here, and you can look across and look at what Sam McLaughlin built himself here in Oshawa just a few years later. So behind you, we have a 1908 McLaughlin Buick Model F, and you can really see in a decade, look how far cars already had come. We also have a 1909 Ford Model T over in the back. So first generation of Model Ts built here in Canada. So these are the folks that George Foote Foss was hanging out with. We know the name of McLaughlin, we know the name of Ford, and now we can compare them all, tell the story here in Canada of the pioneers, including this earlier step. Because without people like George Foote Foss and other kind of tinkerers, inventors, mechanics at the time, we certainly wouldn't have the industries with Buick, with Ford, with these major industries. But there are lots of people like George Foote Foss, and a story like his, I think, is quite inspirational to all those tinkerers out there. So it's absolutely wonderful that it's here in the museum now, and we can compare it. We can really, take it off. Love these photos. Thank you to Bruce Chapman for working on our interpretive panels. And we do a great job with the images that have survived over the years of vehicles like this. But I'll be the first to say that, we'll get some nice photos, some nice captions. That's always well and good. But there's something about the actual automobile itself. And that's why a project like the Fossmobile is so important to us here at the museum, because there's something tangible about it. Even though it's not even, it's not the original that George Foote Foss built those many years ago, it still gives you an idea of the size, the shape, even the smell of this type of car, of the wood, of the materials, which just really pop off the page there, which you can't really sum up on a Wikipedia article or on a website. It's just so much cooler seeing the actual car here. And for those of us who work in the museum, pushing it around, keeping it clean and dusting it, you really get to know these wonderful pieces. So there's one thing I've learned over the last couple of years. I've actually learned it from Disney movies, and that's that everyone needs an origin story to really tell their tale. And so with the Fossmobile, I think of it as kind of the origin story of the Canadian automotive experience that has happened over the past 125 years. And so with this origin story, we're actually working with a grant from the Canadian government. We've actually received a $39,000 grant from the Department of Canadian Heritage. And we are developing a new traveling exhibit. Yes, a traveling exhibit, our first we've ever done here. Dumaresq de Pencier is our curator for that. He's hiding over here in the corner. So Dumaresq is working on a brand new exhibit. Our working title is Driving in the Dominion, but I'm not quite set on it yet, but this exhibit, which we'll have finished next year, is going to actually talk about the origins of the Canadian automotive industry in the 1890s and early 1900s. This is a really pivotal point in Canadian history with the growth of the automotive sector. And so using the Fossmobile, we're going to use it as our kind of primary artifact in that exhibit. And we're going to build up the story, because most of those cars, just like the Fossmobile, no longer exist. And so we have black and white photos, we have newspaper accounts, we have stories of other cars that came just a few years after the Fossmobile, but they didn't survive. And so it's always hard to tell those stories of things that don't survive. But luckily with the Fossmobile now, we can build out that story because we have something of the size, the shape of that generation. So look forward to that coming up. We're very excited. We're going to have it on display here next year, probably in the fall. We'll have it. We're on time. We're good for We're on schedule with that exhibit. And then it's going to travel on to the Canadian Transportation Museum in Heritage Village down in Kingsville, Ontario. And so that will be the next stop. And hopefully from there, we will continue traveling. It's going to be a banner exhibit, and we plan on traveling the Fossmobile as well to take it out to other locations across Canada to show this story. So that was something that Ron was very passionate about, that it's great to have this project done, but it's really great to share it with all Canadians from coast to coast. And a lot of people can't make it here in person to Oshawa, so we want to have available information online, but also actually take this on a roadshow to various museums and locations across Canada. So a lot more to come. This is definitely not the end of the Fossmobile story. Certainly just another step in the promotion of the history and of the story of early automotive ingenuity here in Canada. So I will turn it over to, well, first of all, I think Ron needs a huge round of applause. Let's not forget that. Most of us couldn't imagine doing this sort of undertaking. I know a lot of people that restore cars that already exist, but it is quite rare to take something from a photograph, from diaries, from family accounts, and make it really come to life in this sort of way. And I know my father golfs for a hobby in his retirement. He definitely does not go through this kind of effort as a passion project. So another round of applause for Ron. Thank you so much for your energy in this. So I believe Dumaresq, should I turn it over to you now for a few remarks en français, and then we will turn it over to Ron for some more remarks. Does that seem to work? Excellent.
Donc, bonsoir tout le monde. Si vous m'excusez, je suis en train de recouvrir d'un rhume saisonnal, alors je vais être un petit peu bref, mais je vais commencer encore avec la lettre du Premier ministre, qui dit « Chers amis, je suis heureux de présenter mes salutations les plus chaleureuses à toutes les personnes qui assistent aujourd'hui la cérémonie marquant l'entrée de la Fossmobile au Musée canadien de l'automobile à Oshawa. Depuis 1963, le Musée canadien de l'automobile rend hommage à l'histoire de l'automobile en mettant l'accent sur l'industrie canadienne. Les histoires qui y sont racontées et les véhicules qui sont exposés témoignent du riche patrimoine automobile de notre pays. Aujourd'hui, vous êtes réunis pour inaugurer la plus récente acquisition du musée, la Fossmobile, la première automobile à moteur à essence au Canada, qui s'avérera une réussite, construite en 1896 à Sherbrooke par George Foote Foss. Je me joins à vous pour féliciter la famille Foss, Fossmobile Enterprises et toutes les personnes qui ont participé à la construction de cette réplique hommage. Avec cette reconnaissance, George Foote Foss prend la place qui lui revient aux côtés d'autres pionniers de l'automobile, dont les histoires remarquables ne manqueront pas d'inspirer les générations futures. Je vous souhaite une cérémonie aussi agréable qu'inoubliable. Cordialement, le très honorable Justin P.J. Trudeau, CP, député, Premier ministre du Canada. Donc voilà, c'était impressionnant. Mais oui, c'est vraiment un véhicule assez fondamental à notre collection, la Fossmobile. C'est pas naturellement l'auto le plus âgé du Canada, mais en considérant que la vaste majorité des autos sur nos routes aujourd'hui sont des autos à essence, c'est pas mal important le premier auto à essence au Canada. Et c'est intéressant ces connexions avec des autres projets sur qui on travaille aussi au Musée canadien de l'automobile. On vient juste de terminer une exposition sur l'histoire des électriques et c'est en effet une expérience assez pénible avec une électrique qui a inspiré George Foote Foss à créer son propre moto ou auto à essence. Il a fait un voyage à Detroit en 1896, je pense, où en prenant un petit tour dans la ville dans une électrique, ben, ça a perdu courant. Il dit, ben, il devrait y avoir quelque chose de meilleur que celle-ci, je vais le faire. Et le résultat, c'est ça. Donc, c'est un pièce qui manque comme, ben disons, c'est l'ancêtre de tous les autres véhicules dans notre collection qui fonctionnent à essence. C'est l'ancêtre de tous les véhicules sur nos routes qui fonctionnent à essence. Et c'est vraiment une inspiration pour tous les Canadiens et les Canadiennes qui cherchent à créer quelque chose ou qui cherchent à reconstruire leur histoire ou à chercher de nouvelles histoires. C'est vraiment l'histoire du passion de M. Foss, Ron Foss ici, le grand-fils de George Foote Foss, l'inventeur original, qui a reconstruit presque de zéro. Il n'y avait aucun plan, il y avait seulement quelques photos. Et c'est vraiment une histoire de construction d'auto inspirant et une histoire de construction d'hommages, de répliques assez inspirant. C'est aussi la fondation d'un nouveau projet pour le Musée canadien de l'automobile. On espère en automne 2023, 24, c'est 24? 2024? Ouais, OK. Donc, on espère lancer une nouvelle exposition sur l'histoire des automobiles canadiens avant 1910. Notre petite tentative, c'est conduire vers la Dominion. Tentative, on est en train de décider un final. Mais avec le Fossmobile comme pièce centrale, ça va voyager tout partout dans le Canada, en commençant par le Musée canadien du transport et le village historique, c'est Kingsville, n'est-ce pas? Oui, donc ça va voyager là-bas et encore plus loin, et ça va démontrer à tous les Canadiens, pas juste sur papier, l'histoire du tout début de l'industrie canadienne de l'automobile, mais avec un objet physique, un objet pas mal, franchement, très belle et impressionnant, comment a débuté cette industrie ici au Canada. Donc, je pense que maintenant, on va passer les remarques à M. Foss lui-même. Take it away, Ron.
Well, good evening, everybody, and what a journey. It's been exactly 4 years where I showed up here at this museum and spoke with Alex Gates and said, I'm thinking of building a tribute replica of my grandfather's car. Do you want it? I wasn't looking to do something that would end up in my own garage. I wanted something that was going to be available for Canadians. And the first thing he did was turn to a book and said, yep, I know all about it. And yes, if you can do it, we will take it. So I'm very much appreciative of the conversations I've had with Alex over the last 4 years, who's kept me on track with making sure that we met the criteria as set out by the museum, one of which was it doesn't have to run. So we were grateful for that part of it because it is a static display only, and there's a whole lot of reasons and host of reasons for that particular reason. It certainly is an honor to be standing here in front of you and in this museum, to know that it has a place for perpetuity was certainly an important consideration for what we were trying to achieve as a family. The upper floor is, I believe, all Canadian cars. If you get the chance, we hope that you'll not only visit while you're here now, but we hope everybody will get an opportunity to come and visit the museum and the various displays, including the Fossmobile. I would like to just acknowledge a few guests that are here, not by name, too many, but we do have representation from our various corporate sponsors, the list of which is behind me here. There will be a more formal board established that will include individual private donors as well. But there are organizations who didn't donate financially necessarily that participated in a huge way. Jason Humphreys is here tonight. Jason, you just put your hand up a little bit. Jason was the chief mechanic behind anything mechanical associated to the Fossmobile. Fred Miller, who couldn't be here this evening, was the fellow responsible for anything you see that is wood in nature. It certainly was a collaborative effort. There were so many people involved, I can't begin to list them all. The network and community that has been built around the Fossmobile is fairly significant and extremely supportive. We were able to show the vehicle at the Cobble Beach Concours Elegance in Ontario in late September, and I can tell you that was an absolute privilege to be invited to such a venue. Beside Alex, I would suggest that the board of directors here for the museum has also been behind this project right from the get-go. I've been to a few events here, and they've always been very supportive and looking to determine what the progress was of our steps at rebuilding this car. So thank you to them as well, and for hosting this evening. I think it's a remarkable turnout and a wonderful opportunity to have a ceremony to officially induct the car into the museum. It would be a mistake for me to not acknowledge the private donors. Significant number, over 130 private donors who gave very generously to help make this a reality. This project would have stopped a long time ago if it hadn't been for both corporate and private donors. The expense at manufacturing parts is not something I had planned well for. We are probably 100% and more over budget for what we originally speculated it to be. But with that sponsorship, with those private donors, it's allowed us to achieve what you see behind you here. It's been a lifelong dream. My sister would tell you that, we'd sit and listen to our grandfather talk about his car. I spent many hours with my father talking about the possibility of building something like this. It never came to fruition. He passed away really early in life. But for both of them to think that this has been achieved, I think is pretty remarkable. We went to great lengths to maintain authenticity. So when you examine it in some detail, which I can tell you the judges at Cobble Beach, it could not officially be judged because it's all tribute and not anything original. But the judges took a good look at it anyway. And when they acknowledged it, they did so by saying that they thought the authenticity of it was exceptional. And for me, that was a huge comment to be made from such an elite group of individuals who judge these cars on a regular basis across North America. As a family, we're very proud to have it here in the museum. As I said earlier, it's nice to know that all Canadians can get access to this. That was the goal right from the get-go. And the fact that they're going to put it out on a tour and on display, I think is a remarkable effort, something that we've spent a long time talking about, and it was one of my goals going in. I just want to share with you a couple of milestones along the way. Some of you who've been following the story on Facebook or in other places would know about all of this already, but I think it's worth mentioning. When we unveiled the car in April, which was 125 years to the date that it rolled out of the original workshop, the federal government and the minister responsible for the Burlington area presented us with an award of achievement for having accomplished this. You now have heard the letter from the Prime Minister, so we're getting that type of recognition at the Canadian level. The Richard Evans Award was given to us in Sherbrooke by the Quebec Anglophone Heritage Network. If you read the parameters around for which that is granted, it was a remarkable achievement to be granted such an award. And it was to be given to people who do things to preserve Anglophone history in the province of Quebec. So that was, for us being Fort Chambliers, south of Montreal, that was a huge award for us to receive. And then at Cobble Beach, I was called up on stage. Fortunately, I was given a heads up that this was going to happen. And the president of the National Association of Automobile Clubs of Canada and the president of Cobble Beach, who's here tonight, presented me with an award that had two parts to it. The first part acknowledged our effort at building the tribute, but it also acknowledged our grandfather's effort having built the original. And that was a Canadian-wide recognition that we had been looking for a long time, and it was very generous of them to provide that to us. Those are my comments for tonight. I'm sure many of you have questions. I can try to answer them when this is all over, but I'm going to turn it back to Dumaresq, who I think is going to try to wind this up for us and repeat some of what I just said quickly in French.
Alors, naturellement, je ne peux pas être en compétition avec l'émotion et la force avec qui M. Foss a parlé, mais en bref, pour résumer, c'est un honneur d'être devant vous ce soir au Musée canadien de l'automobile. Pour ceux d'entre vous qui nous rejoignent en direct, nous espérons que vous pourrez vous faire une idée de ce lieu merveilleux et de certaines des voitures d'époque qui s'y trouvent. Nous espérons tous que vous les visiterez en personne un jour. Je voudrais également saluer certains invités de marque, pas individuellement, car franchement, il y en a trop. Cependant, des représentants de nos différents sponsors corporatifs financiers et non financiers se joignent à nous ce soir. Je tiens à vous remercier pour tout ce que vous avez fait pour l'ensemble du projet Fossmobile. Cela a vraiment été un effort de collaboration. De plus, j'aimerais remercier Alex Gates et le conseil d'administration du Musée canadien de l'automobile. Ils nous accompagnent depuis le début. Nous tenons à remercier chacun d'entre vous qui avez généreusement fait un don personnel. Nous pouvons fièrement dire que, pour la plupart, des Canadiens ont construit cette Fossmobile et pas seulement la famille Foss. Construire une réplique de la Fossmobile a été un rêve de toute une vie et est une entreprise énorme. Il se tient devant vous maintenant. Nous sommes allés très loin dans nos efforts pour atteindre l'authenticité. Par exemple, nous avons acquis de nombreuses pièces d'époque et utilisé l'ingénierie inverse à partir de nos anciennes photos pour aider cet hommage à ressembler le plus possible à l'invention originale de George Foss. Merci de votre présence, de votre soutien et de le regarder en ligne. Profitez du reste de votre soirée et prenez quelques instants pour examiner la Fossmobile, demander des questions à Ron, naturellement, et l'apprécier dans sa nouvelle résidence. Et je pense, pour terminer, Alex a encore quelques petites remarques. Et merci.
Merci, Dumaresq. Thank you again, Ron. So I'll just end with a few quick remarks. I did want to just give a quick shout out to our board volunteers and staff here. If that is you, please just quickly raise your hand so we give you a round of applause for your work on the museum over the last few years, the various projects. So thank you to everyone running around tonight. I did want to mention after, if you enjoy Dumaresq speaking in English, Dumaresq currently has, or current exhibit is called Wires to Wheels, electric vehicle, I'm going to forget what it's called now, electric vehicles in Canada and beyond, which is upstairs. Dumaresq, we just opened this a few months ago, so following my remarks, if you're interested in a little guided tour of the second floor, Dumaresq is here. He lives in Ottawa, so we don't see him every day. So this is a rare chance to get an example tour from the expert on electric cars. He's done a few Zoom talks for us, but he's here now. So if you want to hear more about that, obviously Ron will stick around to answer some questions about the Fossmobile as well. Please enjoy the refreshments from Berry Hill Catering here in Oshawa. If you don't eat them, I'll have to take them home and eat them. So please help yourself to the cookies and the coffee. And with that, enjoy the evening. Ron, do you want to take any questions, or do you want to take those kind of one-on-one?
I'll take a couple questions.
We'll take a few for the folks at home. I don't know. Are we getting any live stream questions? Yeah, I guess they can do that. If you have any questions, now's your chance. We can go to like the phone lines. People can call in. So if anyone has any questions, from the press gallery, we have Jill McIntosh.
Just before you ask the question, there's one thing I forgot to do that I usually do right at the beginning. And to my grandchildren in Boston, if you're watching, still have it on. Good.
How old was your grandfather when he built this?
Started when he was about 20 and finished it, I guess, when he was 21. Yeah, pretty young. It's why there's no steps on it, because he could have just jumped into it without having to step up. If you look at a lot of old buggies, in fact, when I got this particular chassis, it had a step up in it, and you see some of these old cars, you'll see step ups. This came with the step ups on it. I took them off because the Fossmobile didn't have it. I figured he was young enough to just step on the frame and jump into it. The other little anecdote I'll tell you, Alex brought up the Sam McLaughlin car right behind us here. My grandfather taught Sam McLaughlin how to drive and also sold him his very first car, a Stanley Steamer. So there's some history with Sam McLaughlin and George Foss. It's another reason we chose this museum.
Oh, we have a question from online.
How much does it weigh?
About 750 pounds.
I'm checking my interpretive panel real quick. I don't have to remember this.
Ron,
Yes.
how many horsepower would that engine be expected to put out? Fraction of a horsepower, whatever.
Yeah, so I get horsepower and speed mixed up. Horsepower is just under 4, and the miles per hour was roughly 14. But back then I don't know how they measured that on roads that were probably pretty rough to drive on. But that's what the specs of the engine would suggest, that it could operate at about 4 horsepower and 14 or 15 miles per hour. I think the trip to Montreal, he drove to Montreal once or twice. I would imagine that was a fairly long trek at that speed on roads that were pretty rough. And for those of you who don't know, he received a ticket in Montreal for driving on sidewalks in the wintertime, because the merchants would shovel off the sidewalks. The streets were impossible for the vehicle, and the police didn't like the fact that he was on the sidewalks.
Is this Fossmobile the very, very first ever car that's operated by gasoline
In Canada, yes.
in Canada?
Yes. Successful, yes. Yeah, the key word for us is successful. There are many other people attempting to build gasoline cars. There's one down in Windsor called the Shamrock. There's another one in Northern Ontario. There were a few others being attempted, but they weren't successful. So this was the first successful. Ran for 4 years without any difficulty before it was sold in Montreal in 1901.
Is there any idea of where the original has ended up?
Well, we have some idea as to who it was sold to, and we've approached that family as part of our, historical research of the project. And the family has no historical record to confirm it, but we're pretty sure we know who the original buyer was. We don't go public with that name simply because of client privacy or public privacy issues, but we have a sense as to who we think it is. And back in that day, it was very common for cars to be dismantled, the engine used for stationary purposes, and the rest of it used for scrap iron, particularly as you got closer to World War I. So while my dad and I had hopes that we'd find it in somebody's shed or somebody's barn, that never came out. And we've had so much publicity around the story. This story has been published over 50 times since I started it. We've been on every major television network, CBC radio across the country. So by now, I think if somebody had it sitting in their garage or barn or shed somewhere, it would have surfaced. And the icing on the cake of that story is in 1960, thereabouts, my grandfather received 2 certificates, 2 honorary memberships, one from the Vintage Automobile Club of Montreal and the other from the Antique Automobile Club of America, both of which are still in existence today. Both still embrace the Fossmobile as being a viable true story. And I've always had in my possession the certificate from the club in Montreal, the original certificate that he was given. But the American one from the Antique Automobile Club of America seemed to have disappeared at some point. And when I started this project, probably about 6 months into it, so I would say early or to mid 2019, I got an email from somebody in Quebec says, I think I have your American certificate sitting in a filing cabinet in my basement. Do you want it back? Yes, please. And as it turns out, there was a book, this is the book I was referencing in my opening comments that Alex and I spoke to when I met him here, called Cars of Canada. And that book was published in 1973. And I met one of the authors of that book, Hugh Durnford, in Montreal a couple of times. And he must have taken some materials to write the book from my grandfather and my aunt. Some of the old photographs and the certificate. Now the certificate never got published, but the photographs did. And I guess they just never came back to the family. And this fellow worked for the Vintage Automobile Club of Montreal, and Hugh Durnford was the president back in those days of the club. And he remembered seeing this file with his certificate sort of sticking out of it and felt it was pretty important. He better put it into a filing cabinet. And then as the club changed hands and changed locations and whatever, it's gone through, he ended up taking that filing cabinet home and just putting it in his basement. And the file still was in it. And so was the certificate. So we got the certificate back. And all of that original family archives, so the two certificates, all the old original photographs, anything pertaining to either George Foss or the Fossmobile, the family has donated to Library and Archives Canada in Ottawa. So there it's being properly preserved, it's being climately controlled, it's now uploaded onto their digital platform so you can see it digitally. And we've done the same thing by getting the story up onto the Canadian Encyclopedia as well. So Canadians have access to the information now through a variety of different ways, including the museum.
Can you tell me from start to finish, I might have missed this, but from start to finish, how long did it take you to refurbish it?
Well, refurbishing, remember, it's not the original, so building from scratch, 4 years. Yeah. Yes?
Did your grandfather have any thoughts to building more than one?
Yeah, that's a question we get a lot. He himself, no. I mean, that's why there's no branding on the car. When I found the motor, it had no name on it. We got quite excited because he would have never had any purpose to brand it because he didn't want to commercialize it or hadn't thought about commercializing it. It was a hobby. He ran a bicycle repair shop in Sherbrooke, which you can imagine from November till the end of March. There weren't too many bicycles being used, I don't think. So he needed things to do. And so building the car just seemed like a good idea. He was approached by Henry Ford on 2 occasions to potentially build cars together. Decided that it just wasn't the right fit for him. He was very much an individual person and a tinkerer. The notion of working for a large company wasn't something that he wanted to take on. A private or individual banker in town offered to finance him to build cars, but he didn't want the debt. He didn't want the risks. I try to get people to go back to that day, that time. Everything was horse carriage, horse pulled. Roads were pathetic as we would know them today. And the story from our grandfather was it scared the horses, it got stuck in the mud, the chain would come off the sprockets. The notion of investing commercially into something that early, it wasn't risk he was willing to take. And then as you got to know my grandfather later in life, he was not a risk taker by any means in anything that he did. So not surprising that he didn't commercialize. And we remember him saying, probably sometime in the 50s or 60s, that he actually thought the automobile had become a bit of a menace. That people were getting hurt in it, accidents were happening, no seatbelts yet, that kind of thing. So he had no regrets at not building it. He did say, there's a quote out there somewhere that says something along the lines of, you don't live to be into your 90s and have the stresses that come with working with a large corporate organization. So that was his choice.
Do you have any photographs of the original engine?
No, so that's another question we get asked a lot. The original engine, it's a really good question. It is the one component part in all of the photos that we have, and I say all, I think there's about 10, that doesn't show the actual engine. So the way we went about determining what engine would be correct was to go back and view what he had access to, which is information in Scientific American. And you go back to those journals and you can see designs of engines that actually originated out of either England or France. And the engine that I have is a knockoff de Dion engine. So they were sold as no name, no brand engines into the US. And what I think I found is one of those engines because all the de Dion component parts fit it. So we feel fairly confident. So that's kind of that side of it in relation to what did he have access to. But the 1901 Fossmobile is almost a spitting image of the Fossmobile, with the exception of the front cowling. Everything else looks to be identical. And the engine on it is a 3 3/4 horsepower de Dion engine. So we went to a museum in Springfield, Massachusetts, and photographed a Crestmobile, probably about 350 photographs of all the different component parts. And we used those, or Jason mostly, used those to offset against our original photographs to get the specs and the specifics of the part, because we obviously got a lot more detail and clarity in the newer photographs off the Crest than we did using, pretty grainy 125-year-old photographs.
Actually, a question perhaps for Jason. What would the greatest challenges in actually reconstructing this have been once the research had been completed?
Too many to list, right, Jason?
Yeah, like every part is a one-off part, and you can't buy anything for it, so everything has to be built, even like all the fasteners and everything. Probably the hardest part to build would have been the recoil assembly, because there's 4 little jaws. It runs backwards than every other recoil assembly out there, so it was a lot of time to build it. And a lot of the stuff that they did was all done by cast, so they would build a bunch of them by cast and then they would machine them from there. So we didn't have the resources to cast all the parts, so we just build them from a chunk of metal or part of it all pieced together to build it.
So the recoil that Jason's talking about is the starting mechanism. So there's a pull start inside the cockpit that my grandfather could pull a leather strap, but attached to the engine is a recoil pulley, similarly you'd find on a chainsaw today or a lawnmower, that would turn over the engine and then recoil to pull the pulley back into its place. So inside of that are these teeth that have to be made, and they spin out and spin in depending on the torque to engage the crankshaft to turn over the engine. So yeah, it was probably more. I would say the tiller was probably maybe the next most complicated.
Yeah.
And for those that don't know the tiller, there's 4 components that operate the vehicle. The largest handle operates the steering. The next is the changing of the gear. So it had 2 forward gears, no reverse, no brakes. The throttle, so you could control a little bit of how the gas and air mixture got into the engine. And then the last one on the top, the little brass knob, was to advance or recline the spark, which is something that was necessary to do back in the day to get the engine going. Once it was going, you'd recline it back again. So he could operate everything from the cockpit, including priming the engine. So we often, in the old photographs, if you look at the poster here, you'll see a couple of photographs with this or something similar to it sitting on top. As a family, we joked about what could this possibly be. It must be his iPad. Because we really couldn't come up with anything else. Until we built the cowling and began to realize that the primer valve for the engine, do you want to take this off? Sure. So the primer cup for the engine is right here. And he could reach through the door here and easily access the primer valve. Now he would have used a brass syringe to put a few drops of gas into the primer cup. I still have that syringe, and it's not coming to the museum. Yeah. Yes. You kept telling me that parts sometimes disappear. So, but we started wondering. So why did this stay open all the time? Why was in the photographs do you see it open? Why isn't it closed again? My theory is this is an air-cooled engine, and once he added the vents to the cowling, he was actually getting a little bit of warm air. So on cold days, he get a little bit of heat coming out of the hole here up into the cockpit. But some of these are best guesses, right? We just don't have all the detail. The one thing that I've said to myself probably 1,000 times before I even started this project, and an equal amount of time since taking on the project, is I wished I'd asked my grandfather much better questions when I had the opportunity to. Why didn't we get him to write down a few notes and a bit more detail? But it is what it is.